Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming to the Petaluma Arts Center tonight. This is semi-informal. We're glad to have you here, and so we're going to have a question and answer session tonight. But first, I would like to introduce the person who made this all happen. We have an exhibit committee. We have many different committees. And so on our exhibit committee, we have a wonderful staff of people who do curation, who come up with the ideas and then curate each of these events. So there are a lot of moving pieces to make these things happen. You know, the lighting, all the planning, all the advertising, marketing. I'm getting input from you in terms of what we should do in the future, and I'm sure you're going to give us some feedback tonight, which would be great. And so Katherine Plank has been kind of the unsung hero for our art center for many years and had championed the idea of this Zeitgeist exhibition. So she'll go ahead and tee it off, and we'll start to learn about what it is to be a jurist, what their responsibilities are, and how do each of these pieces of arts become something that we can enjoy, appreciate, and hey, even vote with our pocketbook if we want to, for some of the pieces that are for sale, right? So, Katherine, would you come up? We'll turn it over to you, and then we'll talk to our jurors. Welcome.
Gee, it's so nice to have a microphone. The last time I was up in front of the crowd of 250 people at our opening, Pat and I had to shout. And so this is actually, since I have not much to say tonight, not as much as I had the other night, we have a microphone, so, you know. But anyway, the first thing I want to say is I want to welcome you all for coming here tonight. And I want to also, I want to thank you for coming, and I want to welcome you. And I see a lot of the artists that are in the exhibit, and thank you for coming and continuing to participate in this exhibit, and thank you for the work that you submitted to make this show as good as it is. But tonight, we are actually about the jurors we have 2 of our 3 jurors here, and so they are going to be the ones that are almost in charge here, I should say. We're going to start out, and I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves by telling us all a little bit about how they got into their field of gallery work. Because I think that it's always interesting. Everybody has a little different route, and sometimes they're pretty circuitous. And I find that, I'm always interested in that, so I assume you will be too. And after that, we're going to open it up to questions from you. So you can ask any question you've ever wanted to ask about somebody who has an appreciation for art, has a gallery, who has been in this position of being a juror. I'm sure they are a wealth of information for us. And after which, they have each picked out 3 pieces of art that they are going to talk about a little bit. It's no long lectures. So it's informal. I finally decided no chairs, just a few for people to sit here and there. But I see everybody wanted to sit, so we'll go with that. But you may have to get up and wander around a little bit. So let me introduce our 2 jurors. And Thomas Reynolds from San Francisco and Dennis Calabi from Santa Rosa. And so welcome. So I think what I'll do, I'll start with you, Thomas, and if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and say whatever comes to your mind, and when you're finished, then you can pass the microphone on to Dennis. How does that sound?
Okay, I will.
They're all mic'd up.
Oh, they're mic'd up.
Am I wired, and can you hear me?
Good to go.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting us all the way up from San Francisco. Nothing like drive up 101 to make you appreciate the glories of California. Actually, I came to a gallery pretty much the same way. 30 years ago, almost exactly 30 years ago, I had an invitation to come and interview for a job in San Francisco that I had no intention of taking. But I thought the idea of a free trip to California sounded pretty good, and so I came out and flew into Monterey and met with the committee, and it was the easiest job interview I've ever had because I didn't want the job, so I wasn't nervous. Any question they asked, I knew the answer to, and is it over yet? And I rented a car in Monterey and drove down Big Sur and found a wonderful little place called Dietjen's Big Sur Inn, which if you know, you love. And if you don't know, I hope you forget I said that, because I'd like to keep it as secret as I can. And I checked in, and the room was $35 a night. And when I checked in, the lady said, do you want to have dinner? Do you want to make a reservation for dinner? And I said, no, thank you, because really, dining alone didn't say. Oh, no, she said, eat at the family table. So I came back to the restaurant a few hours later, and by then it was dark, and the fire was burning in the fireplace, and the candles were lit on the table, and I sat down at the family table and ate with 5 or 6 people that I had never seen before or since, and had a wonderful meal, and I'm sure we had wine, and I slept like a baby all night long, and I woke up the next day in this magnificent setting and began to think, maybe this California idea is not so bad after all. And one thing led to another, and I ended up coming to San Francisco, and art really for me became the way of learning about this new place that I was living, because as most of you know, there really is it's a fairly short history, and there really is a thread that runs pretty much from the gold rush to the present, through the Impressionist painters, the tonalist painters, the Society of Six, the modernists, the plein air resurgence, which I became very interested in the 90s. And eventually I gave into my interest in art after I met a young man from Thailand who lived in our neighborhood and had done a lot of paintings in our part of San Francisco. And I rented a little space for 6 weeks to put on a show of his paintings. And that led to 20 years of having a gallery. And one of the most fun things about that was meeting a lot of very nice, for the most part, the people who bother to walk into a gallery are kind, generous, interesting, reflective, thoughtful people, like Pat Martin, for instance, who came into my gallery in San Francisco. And it was really such a wonderful thing. And the idea of California art in particular became kind of the focus of what I was interested in. And mostly I showed contemporary artists at the beginning, but gradually got into more historic artists as well. And that really led to a lot of very, very pleasant times. Last year I closed my gallery on my 20th anniversary, my physical gallery. I miss it in some ways. I miss having a place that people could come by. I don't particularly miss having gallery hours, but happily, through the magic of the internet, I'm still involved, still have a gallery online, and I know now that it will be something that's a part of my life forevermore. So it's fun to be able to share your show with you as well. That's how I got here.
Well, my path was different from Tom's, but also happenstance rather than planned. I never know how to start a story without going to the beginning. So I was born in a family of art lovers, so I was exposed to fine art throughout my youth. Going to the Met, and lots of art books in the house. And about the time I was in high school, my father started seriously collecting and was really passionate about it. And then I went to college in '67 and quickly flunked out, and had, due to more interesting things happening in Berkeley than Anthro 1A. And so I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. My father quit his job, and we're both unemployed, and he said, let's open an art gallery. So I started, and he wanted to specialize in 19th century American paintings. And I started visiting the San Francisco galleries that specialized in that area. There are very few, and reading histories of American painting, and quickly became enamored of the concept of working with vintage art, but disgusted with the state of the gallery world, where it seemed like a bunch of crooked used car salesmen wearing $4,000 Italian suits. So that never happened, but through a connection with one of the dealers, I met the man who became my mentor and teacher, and I went into art restoration and served an old world apprenticeship for 2 years. The old way, no money changing hands, 6 days a week of youthful hard labor and trade for knowledge. And in 1970, set myself up in private practice in San Francisco. And I still do that. That's how I support my gallery, which loses money like a drunk sailor. But anyway, when I turned 60, I always had it in the back of my mind to live my father's dream and open a gallery. And it seemed like a moment when real estate was going through the roof and we were crashing in a recession. I thought, now's the time. So I opened here on Petaluma Boulevard, and to a lot of favorable commentary and huge seas of red ink. And now it's in Santa Rosa, and the red ink is not as deep, but I feel like it's what I was born to do, and that's what I do. And that's it.
I will say, when I got out of art history school, I went straight to San Francisco and got a job in a gallery, and I worked for one of those galleries that are used car salesmen. I was immediately told the first thing to do is pour them a glass of champagne, get them in the back room, and then start bringing paintings to them, and don't let them out until you have their credit card in your hand. So I lasted, needless to say, 3 months at that job. But it was interesting. Anyway, so I would like to open it up now to you all to ask questions, anything I think that comes into your mind about the whole experience of gallery and art. And you know, if you...
Would you like to sit or we ought to stand?
Standing is fine.
Okay,
That's
why don't
all
you
right.
run right up here? Yeah, there's a good spot for you. Go ahead.
I feel like we're going to be pinned to
Ask
the wall.
questions. Why don't you go ahead and I'll give the mic to you. Who'd like to start? Okay, here we go.
I'm kind of curious if either one of you do any of your own art, or just are patrons of the arts.
Well, no, I don't make anything from scratch, but I continue to do the restoration almost continually to feed the gallery that must be fed.
No talent on my part either, I'm afraid. I'm a recovering lawyer in my other life and publisher of various materials and have never had the slightest hint of artistic talent, I'm afraid, which is why I like to hang around with other people who do have talent.
I'll just speak loudly. My understanding is that with the bulk of jury shows now, you receive digital images of the art, and then you go through the digital images and make your selection. And so I think we've all had the experience of seeing something digitally and then seeing it in real time. So I guess after you've done this for a while, I assume that you sort of get an instinct for what something's going to look like. But I just wonder if you, in the course of jurying shows, that you've ever, picked a couple of pieces and then seen them hung and gone, my God, that's not exactly what I thought. If you want to give us an anecdote or something, that would be great.
Well, in some ways, it's not as different as it has been, at least recently for me, in that other shows that I've jurored in the last 10 or 15 years, usually you got a CD, in the mail that had everything on it. So now everything is online. So in that sense, it's not that different. You're looking at images on a computer screen, whether they're on the CD that you plug in or whether they're online. But it absolutely is a totally different thing. Somebody said to me early on when I got interested in collecting paintings, and I really came at it more as a collector who opened a gallery, that you should never buy anything you haven't seen, that you haven't been in the room with. Now, in the age of the internet, I want to emphasize that rule no longer applies entirely. Somebody who runs an online gallery now, but it is still true in many ways, I think. I mean, what I have found is that, for instance, in having my gallery online now, if you know, Pat and I were talking about this earlier, if you know an artist's work, if you've been in the room with the real thing, then you can oftentimes look at an image online and have a sense of what it is. I mostly have been interested in paintings, mostly oil paintings. And so the texture really has so much to do with the effect that a painting has on you. But once you know the artist's work, it's a lot easier to do that. What I found myself going back and forth with in the online images that we reviewed for this show is scale makes a difference. You know, I mean, this painting, large, is an entirely different situation than this painting this size. Or I saw one of the photographs in the other gallery that I'd really liked. It was tiny when I saw it here. Now, it doesn't make it a better or worse piece of art, but it certainly does have a totally different effect, I think. Absolutely. Yeah, Dennis?
Yeah, I agree totally. And also, I feel that photographs of works of art are sort of like photographs of people, and that some people are photogenic and some are not. And the same with art, that some things reproduce so that they're more exciting than the real object, and vice versa. Some things just project an intensity in the flesh that is totally lacking in the photo. So it's difficult to be fair. And in the past, I've juried shows that were a hybrid, where you do a rough pass based on digital images, and then you see the real art. And I certainly prefer it, but I understand when you're avoiding the cost and risk of shipping things huge distances, it makes sense. But there would be simpler ways to do the digital imaging than the system we used, which drove me completely bananas. We're sitting up all night where there are these, 3 different ways to look at the art. And one of the ways, you could click on the thumbnail and have it blow up, but you wouldn't get any of the information. So then you have to close that, go to the other system, try and find the image again, click on it, and it would give you the size, the medium, title, whatever. And when you're looking at 400 images, that becomes sort of unpalatable.
Yeah, you may have had the same reaction that I did, that you can tell this program was invented by somebody who knows computer programming, not necessarily art. I'm sure it ticked off all the boxes of what the person who was creating it, because you could see a large image, you could see a small image, you could see a group of images. But when you start, or I found anyway, when I started looking at it, I oftentimes wanted to know the size especially. I thought that was something that really made a difference. And the large image didn't have the size, so you close the large image and you go back to the small image. I mean, it's nobody's fault. People who make computer software are computer software makers and not people who are considering it from the art point of view. And then there's a separate, mostly I didn't read, should I say this? The artists are here. Mostly I didn't read the artist's statement, because I find sometimes that kind of gets in my way of looking at an image. You know, what you meant by this, I need to know by looking at the painting, not by reading a statement of what you had in mind about it. So for the most part, I didn't read those. but occasionally you wanted to know more for some reason, particularly you needed to know that. And I thought that was especially true in this group of work where there's so many different media. I mean, a carved salt lick, I don't think I've seen one of those before. And yet it was very interesting. And on stone, cassine on stone, so sometimes those where there's more than two dimensions, where it's more in a painting or a photograph, then it gets even more complicated, I think, when you're looking at an image online. I like the show. I wonder what we might have left out that we would also have liked if we saw it on the wall.
Yeah.
Is it on the same question or a different question?
No, it brings me to how then you can hear me. How do you sift from 400 to 67? I mean, that just absolutely blows me away. So what process do both?
Well, here's another problem of transparency, that what I read in the thing was that we had to narrow it down to 40. So I was really surprised when I came and saw 67. But the most difficult thing for me was that compared to other shows of jury, the entries were surprisingly strong across the board. And usually it's, how the hell am I going to find 40 decent pieces that aren't embarrassing? This time it was, how the hell am I going to eliminate over 300 good pieces? So
because the program wouldn't let us sign off until we did.
Right, yeah. Oh my God, to have more coffee or whiskey? But most of my rejections were not over quality or lack of artistic intent, but simply they had nothing to do with the zeitgeist, in my humble opinion. So there are a lot of very lovely landscapes, very well done, very beautiful things that I'd be happy to hang on my wall, but it was the same landscape 200 years ago, and knock on wood, it might be the same in 100 years. And so I just felt like they're not paying attention to what the show's supposed to be about. So
See, Dennis is much more fair-minded than I am. I didn't have any of those reservations at all. I figure with a word like that, anything fits, huh? Our times, that doesn't narrow it in any way. And I think, I've said this to a million times, perhaps to you and John in my gallery, that you buy art with your gut, not with your head. And that's how I jured the show as well. I like it.
That was my question for you.
Yeah.
What's your first
Right.
response to
If I like it, I included it. If I didn't like it, I graded it down. Not very scientific, I'm afraid.
Well, no,
True.
that's what it's all about.
Did you have one run through where you narrowed it down to 300 and then you took away another 100 and then finally got down to 67? Or
Well, it didn't work exactly, at least for me, it didn't work exactly like that, but it was, different groups of pieces, and I would just try to go through and kind of, as I remember, in fact, one of my complaints about the program, sorry, we sound like we're complaining a lot about your system, I know. Yeah. Well, I thought the emphasis was in the wrong place. I thought we were looking through the wrong end of the telescope. You had to eliminate the ones you didn't like. I'd rather pick the ones I did like.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, it's a, what's the difference? Well, there is a difference.
Yeah, because
there is a difference.
You want to reward excellence rather than castigating failure.
Yeah. So I think I went through and eliminated, I thought, all right, 400 to 40, you got to eliminate most of them, so be strong. But when I got through the first time, I had still more than 40, and so I had to go back through again until I got it down to the 40 that I thought were best.
So how did the three then get together?
The magic of
electronically,
computers, I
we
guess.
never communicated.
Miraculously end up with the same 40 pieces?
It was all done by algorithms. And when I came in, I was really surprised because there are a number of pieces that I voted out hanging and a number of pieces that I voted for that are nowhere to be seen. But that's why there's 3 of us.
Yeah, I think then there was a second round when we all picked our 40, and I think there was something like 100, so we didn't agree on very much, apparently. And then we had to go through those and narrow that second group down again. And to make things more difficult, I was on the road then when that second part came, so I'm looking at my phone.
Oh, God.
The little postage stamps have become smaller still.
We had a question over here.
You partially answered it, but do you have a basic criteria that you use for when you critique these, at least for the first rough cut?
I'm with Tom. It's all a gut thing. Either it moves me or it doesn't. And it's more about the feeling than, I'm not obsessed with technical perfection. I'm impressed by it, but something that's incredibly well made but leaves me totally cold will not score as high for me as something incredibly crude and primitive that touches me deeply. And that's really what I want, is to be touched and moved, taken to another place.
Yeah, I found I had to open my mind a little bit because mostly I am interested in, and mostly what I know is about paintings. And yet there are a lot of different media, a lot of different materials and all. So I thought, all right, you really have to sort of open yourself to the possibility, particularly the 3-dimensional objects. And it was interesting because many of those turned out to be my favorites. Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that going in.
That's where my question was, is on the 3-dimension, is when you look at the photographs, are you just looking at one photograph, or when they're 3-dimension, do you sometimes get, like the one right behind you, the shadow is part of the art, seeing that shadow and the way the name is, or here you've got the dimensions. So are you only getting one photograph?
There were multiple images of some of them. Not all of them, but there were multiple. And I don't know that it was the 3-dimensional pieces, but there were. And I know that because I'm so bright. The first time I went through, I thought, wow, this looks a lot like that other one. Until I...
Right.
It is.
I went through that too. But on this piece, I must say that, and I love it, but a lot of credit goes to Nick Van Kreit, who
is that the lighting?
did the hanging and the lighting, because that's not how it was in the photograph. He's a master of lighting.
Right.
I might say that the artist is right here down at the
Ah.
Well, you can't show the shadow in the photograph. It's too confusing. So
Right.
I have an awfully hard time, but that is always a big part of it.
Yeah. Do you consider that when you make your art, how the shadow will factor into it?
Only the name, really. That actually would have looked better with the light coming up, but they couldn't do it that way.
I don't know. I think that signature is perfect, just the way it's
The
lit.
signature, yes, but the fish would have fish. But anyway,
Yeah, it would have been cool.
No, I don't have to. It takes care of itself.
Well,
Yeah.
you do give us a little bit of direction, and we've tried to figure out how we can make it lit from the bottom, but people are going to trip. So.
And it worked fine. It worked out fine. Happy.
If I could, from a different perspective, is that how many of you are artists that have submitted, maybe even are showing here? Any of you here that have submitted any art that's shown? We have several, right? Okay, and I was, this nice piece behind the tall one there that's about 8 feet high, I was speaking to that artist, and she said that the process of submitting, she said it was okay. She said working with the Petaluma Art Center is that the size of the graphics and you have to do a lot of Photoshop or things. It worked out okay. So would any of you care to comment on what you thought? Was it easy enough to make your submission for us, or did we have to jump through a lot of hoops? Anybody care to make a comment?
Michael, that's an institutional question. That's not
I can make one little comment.
Okay, please.
Not from an artist's point of view, but I know Katherine and I show her work. And she happens to be a professional photographer. So in her case, providing a very high quality photo is like breathing, where for most artists, not so much.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. For those of you who are artists or other people who enter competitions, you can't overstate the importance of the photography. Now, maybe that's fair, maybe it's not fair, but if I can't see it, artists used to ask that, especially when they wanted to submit their work to the gallery. How do you want it? Do you want me to send you photos, or do you want an online site? Do you want a CD? Do you want slides in the old days? I don't care. I just want to see the work. Send it to me in the way that shows the work the best. And most of the images were pretty good for this show, I thought. But there are a few that you thought, you didn't do yourself any favors here by sending in this picture. So it, rightly or wrongly, it absolutely does make a difference when you're submitting your work.
I have a two-part question. One is that what do you like best about being a jurist? And then what inspiration did you find perhaps in this show?
Well, I said I'm a recovering lawyer, so I didn't get to be a judge. Is that what you mean? I always thought it was, from the very beginning of having a gallery, I thought it was such a privilege to get to see work. And anytime anybody asked me if I would consider their work, I always said yes, because that's the fun part. You're there because you enjoy artwork, you enjoy the creative process, and so why wouldn't you look at it if somebody brings you something or sends you something to take a look at? The flip side of that is that, unfortunately, about 99.5% of the time you have to say no. And so it does come with a negative, but I just sort of accepted that as part of the deal. And usually what I would say to people when they said, will you consider my work, is I would try to say that up front. I want to tell you that I have more than I can say grace over now. I really don't have the capacity to take on any more. I have a small gallery. There are only 12 months in the year. Even if I have a show every month, there's a limit to what. So I want to tell you before I look that the answer is no, I can't work with you. But I would love to offer my 2 cents worth. And I hope that sort of lessened to some, you're still rejecting somebody, whether you like their work or you don't. There's a certain amount of rejection built into it. So I always took that approach, that I would say yes, but I would tell them the answer was no before I actually looked at the work, hoping that didn't mean, oh my God, he saw it and hated it. Because that really isn't how it happens. Dennis?
Well, I don't know. I feel honored to be asked, and I take the responsibility really seriously. And because of that, it's largely a painful process, because I hate to rain on anyone's parade, and I know how sensitive I am to negative criticism, and obviously it's not a direct criticism, but when you reject something, it's going to cause pain, and I do not want to cause pain. And beyond that, I know that my tastes are exceedingly personal, and like anyone else's, totally subjective. You can call us art experts, but we're just as subjective as the next person.
We're just foolish enough to open the doors and pay rent on a gallery.
Yeah, well, we all have our own filters, and I may be rejecting someone who is really significant just because I don't. So I try to really open up and, to the extent possible, put my personal stuff on hold. But on the other hand, that's why there's 3 of us, so we can indulge our feelings and hopefully it balances out.
Yeah, I thought there was some advantage to this show in a way because I didn't know any of the artists. It's very hard when I had at my gallery for several years shows of the California art clubs, Northern California, and many of the artists I knew. And however professional, hard-hearted, choose your word, you are, well, once you know somebody's work, then knowing that person and knowing other things that you've seen inevitably factors into it all. So I thought in some way it was an advantage for me that I didn't really know any of the artists whose work that I was looking at. So.
Any other questions? Oh, here we go, Janet.
I don't know if I need that one. You mentioned that there was a large variety of types of art here, and did that play into it? Did you try to get that?
I wouldn't say that I tried really to have a range of types, but it did play into it, as I said, because I felt like this is not my strength in some ways. I mean, I'd never judged a sculpture out of a salt lick before. On the other hand, I doubt many other people have either, so I wasn't that far behind. But no, I didn't try to be fair. I wouldn't say I tried to be inclusive or diverse in that sense. But I did try to open my mind to some of the possibilities that weren't paintings, for instance, or even photographs. And I'm delighted to see that a lot of them are in the show, too.
I had two questions, one of which I think was sort of answered, and the first one was how you determine what goes in a show with a theme, and it sounds like each judge either pays attention to the theme or doesn't. So do I have that? It's kind of just idiosyncratic with who's judging.
Well, it sounds like Dennis did and I didn't,
yeah.
Or paid more attention than I paid
Yeah,
less.
to me
perhaps.
it had to say something about our time specifically, and that's my reading of what the Zeitgeist is. It doesn't have to be some sort of apocalyptic vision of the end of the world, but whether it's, for instance, this portrait here, that in one sense it could be from any time, but I voted for it because I felt like we're at a period when there are probably more aged people than ever before, and the whole gerontology thing is very much an issue of today. And while she looks like a pretty healthy senior, it's still, to me, there's something about it that spoke to that.
I was surprised by the size of that piece when I came in tonight.
I was too.
Yeah.
Well, when I came to the opening.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was...
Yeah, I had, before you get to your second question, I had, I guess it did register in some way, the photograph of the barn, the shadows and the light and the barn and the other. I love that. I love that. And I don't remember how I voted, which, for good or bad. But on the one hand, you could argue that that photograph has absolutely nothing to do with the theme here, because that's nothing of our times. I didn't see it that way. I mean, as I say, I think sort of everything has to do with our times, and so it didn't matter to me if it were, specifically thematic or not. And plus, I have a little bit of a prejudice against work that sort of hits you over the head with a 2x4. Mm-hmm. I don't mean forceful work. I don't mean impactful work. But, spare me your sort of, whether it's a political statement or something like that. That's not what I think of art doing. And so my prejudice comes out a little bit in that. Although I will say, I hope this comes across positively if you're here, because this painting on this side, everyone in America has wheels with the shopping cart.
Oh, yeah.
I had that reaction when I looked at it. It's like, give me a break. But when I saw it tonight, when I walked in, I thought, that's pretty nice. I was wrong about that. That's pretty nice. You had a second question.
Other than the artwork itself, how important are all of the other things when people apply, like their resume, like if they've been in shows or galleries before, and their artist statement, or how much they're charging for the piece, or all of that other stuff?
I don't even look at that. And after I've made my initial opinion, then I look for curiosity. But there's plenty of people who I mean, George Bush went to Princeton. What did that do for him? You know,
He's a painter now. Come on.
He's got the resume, but
I didn't mean like if they were a college
people who didn't get out of
graduate,
kindergarten are geniuses.
More their artistic resume, not their job resume.
Right, but it just, you know, a lot of my favorite artists, I mean, some of them went to art school and some didn't, but they just hid out in the woods and made their art instead of going to New York and buying chocolates for Clement Greenberg. There's different ways to do your career.
I think it probably does matter to most gallerists. How could it not, in a way, if somebody has a successful resume? How can it not matter? But I think it does cut both ways because, you know, we all like to discover something that nobody else has discovered, particularly if they're dead. No, I always say we like our artists to be poor and starving while they're alive, and then when they die, we like to discover them and really bid up their value alive, right? I always told artists who ask about artist statements, usually my first question to an artist was, what's your story? And oftentimes the next question was, you mean my artist statement? No, I absolutely do not mean your artist statement, because I think that's usually a lot of claptrap, you know, a lot of art speak, a lot of, you know, I hate artist statements. But I want to know your story, you know, and I really, I think this is the best advice I ever gave any artist, and I would give it to every artist. Figure out your, you know, in Silicon Valley they call it the elevator pitch. You get in an elevator with somebody and you got 45 seconds before they get to their floor. I think that's what an artist's story is. Tell me your story. Who are you? What are you doing? What are you trying to say? And that's 3 or 4 sentences. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to do, but that's what I want to know. Who are you? What are you doing? What's your work about? Why should somebody be interested in it?
I think one more question, and then maybe we'll do the locker room. How does that sound? Is there another question? Well, maybe I'll ask another question. So, when you are looking at art, do you actually? I know that you've already said, both of you, that you look at art with your gut first and foremost, and I think, in a lot of ways, I think that's really good news. But in addition to that, do you ever look at the art in the context of the times it was created in, or the longevity of what this art will do, you know, as it ages, or is that something that you just don't think about at all?
Well, the era in which it was created is essential if you're looking at historical art, because, like for me, a lot of contemporary plein air painting, even when it's excellently executed, it just sort of reminds me of someone 80 or 100 years ago who did it slightly better and has the patina of age. And I fell in love with historical painting long before I even accepted contemporary. I was late to the game. So you sort of have to judge it through its time. And there are paintings like a lot of post-war abstraction that was absolutely radical in its time, now looks, when there's contemporary artists imitating the style, it looks sort of prosaic and, oh yeah, I've seen that stuff before. But someone doing it in 1945, when no one had ever done it, is totally different from someone doing it today in the same manner. It may be technically excellent, but it's sort of been there, done that.
Yeah, I managed to offend some people at a California Art Club event once along the way. You mentioned the contemporary plein air work, which I happen to be interested in, by asking, you know, do you all have to paint exactly the same eucalyptus tree?
Right.
And it does sometimes have that quality. And then if you put a gold frame around it, You've sort of compounded the problem.
Right. Yeah, the Carmel galleries, you go in and there's one guy who's imitating Granville Redmond and another one is imitating Edgar Payne, and they've mastered the strokes exactly. And it's like giclée done with oil paint. I don't get it.
Yeah, but I will say this, it's not as easy to figure out what's going to last over time as you wish it would be. And let me offend somebody else by saying that I think a prime example of that is the new San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. I do not think much of that art will still be on the walls 100 years from now.
That's very, very interesting. Well, we thought we all learned a lot from the turn of the 20th into the 20th century, when so much of what we know of now and love was considered wild beasts, for one. And so you think, okay, I'm going to have a better way of looking at art now. I'm not going to make those mistakes, but I guess maybe that's just something that's impossible.
Well, it's impossible to know. Yeah, I do think that one you mentioned in your question, and I think one thing that's really important is work that continues to unfold over time. Mm-hmm. Now, work that you don't get entirely when you look at it the first time. I think a good painting is something that continues to give up its secrets over time. And I've seen that many times in my gallery that, I would try, I didn't always do it, but I would try midway through a show to rehang some pieces. And it made all the difference in the world. You see something in different light, in different orientation, and repeatedly people would come into the gallery and say, oh, that's you've added that one.
Yeah.
No, it was there all along. Things just look different in different circumstances and in different light. That's a reason that I always encourage people to take things home and try them. I mean, sure, it's a sales technique partly. You get it out the door, you get it in their door, you're at least a step along the way. But that's not really the reason to do it. I mean, the reason to do it is to see it in your house. Not whether it matches the sofa, but the lighting, all of those other things. I mean, a piece of art particularly oil paintings, it's a living, real thing. And it responds to the light, it responds to your mood, all of those different things. And so I think artwork that continues to reveal itself is something that sort of continues to challenge you and to reward you as time goes by.
So that is the challenge. How do you
I have a question now for the main puppet master. Katherine said she would generously answer this question, not knowing what it is. And so, when you decide, about how many pieces we're going to have, and I see things like beauty, art, culture, religion, spirit, all these different things, all this other stuff that goes on. Tell us just a little bit about how that all comes together.
Well, when I was creating the call to art, I was trying to figure out the best way that I could relay what I wanted people to address or think about in their work that they would submit or not submit. And, I was mulling it over and over in my head, and I had all these different ideas. We're all part of the zeitgeist. So how do you do that? Well, so my solution was to create the poster and have these words floating on the poster instead of, in sentences trying to describe everything you could include, and then in thinking about, okay, how do I want to hang the show? How are we gonna, now we have the public that's gonna come in. They didn't necessarily pay attention to that flyer that went out for Call to Art, although we do have a little bit on the postcard. So I thought, let's just keep that moving, that same idea. And I know somebody could think, this will take away from the art, and perhaps it does, but I wanted people to be aware of what Zeitgeist encompassed as much as I possibly could, because the word is actually pretty complex. The Zeit, time, geist, spirit. So it's not just the here and now, it's everything that's kind of come from the past that's ineffable. It's change, it's not solid, it's not black and white. And so, these are ideas that gets people to thinking. And I actually had a lot of people tell me, they thanked me for having those words on the call for art because it really got their juices going. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And was it difficult to decide what went with each word? I mean, do you think of them as categories?
No. I mean, there were a couple of words that I think probably go with a piece, but I was not trying to match them up in any single.
So the words just happen to be where they are. They don't necessarily.
I actually, after everything was hung, I went around and taped up the word, and then Nick came around with his brilliance and genius and applied them. So
it does make a difference, I found, in doing shows. The title of a show matters. The hanging of the show matters. How you are presenting an idea. You particularly in this case were presenting an idea, and you want to do that in a way that both guides people through seeing the art and yet leaves them room to find their own engagement.
Right, yeah, yes, that's it. Okay. Well, great. So thank you for all your wonderful answers to the questions. And I think it was interesting. We have, two sort of different perspectives on, how they approach art and how they approach this show. And I think it's been really enlightening. So which of you would like to start first with? Okay. Dennis, you're it.
Yay.
Well, I guess you don't need the microphone.
The what?
You don't need a microphone.
No. This is the part where I don't have a clue what to say other than choosing some pieces I really like and saying, I really like it, but...
That makes us all feel good about ourselves. Yes. Because I think that's...
I'd like to applaud what you guys have done so far.
Thank you.
I think it was a good idea that you gave them seats. They're a much more receptive audience. 3 pieces. You're on.
Okay, well, I was going to start with Katherine's here because I don't know, I really, really like it. And I think it's all about, the different layers of, partly who she is, but partly who anyone can be, and sort of a feminist statement about, she's got the hammer, and the work gloves, she can do it all. And then the personal protection thing about, in our times, we're surrounded by poisons, and one needs to have protection with the mask, the gloves, the knee pads, and while on the surface, it might just be about protection in certain types of work and art making. It's about just surviving in our times in a toxic world. She's very environmentally conscious. So I see all that stuff, plus it's visually intriguing. But as I was...
If you buy this piece, does it come with the hanger, or do you have to figure out that part yourself?
In fact, Katherine said that, when she worked with Nick, who, makes all the magic happen here, is that, how to get him exactly the right height. She wanted to be sure that it was hung just right. So, it's oftentimes a synthesis thing. You don't learn this at art school, but so the apparatus that she had to clip it off and to get it exactly aligned was some of the secret sauce on how to make it work.
Yeah.
I would like to add that she was here for 6 hours hanging that. Nick said that he could get it hung in 20 minutes, which I believe he could. But she was not ready to let go of that. But he did. We spent a lot more time making them even after shoot for the next day.
But don't tell.
No. And because we were still adjusting the rest of the show. But she also said that she did not like the idea of it originally when she saw that it was going to be on gray walls. She was unhappy, but then she now felt she liked it a lot better.
She's perfect.
I like it on the gray, yeah. And then that that piece there. I mean, I loved it when I first saw the image, but since then, as we've been standing there talking, I've been just totally mesmerized. I'm in love with that painting. And I don't have a clue why. I mean, part of it is it's reminiscence to certain surrealists, Morandi, and trying to think of, I can't remember her name, even though it was in my mind 2 days ago, but a Chicago artist in the 30s, a woman who, although I believe she was academically trained, painted in a faux primitive style, but with these very austere sorts of landscapes. And this is much more finely crafted, but I don't know, it just really gets me. I love it.
I was talking to Dennis and Thomas earlier about how, like Charles and Ray Ames, when they said that they would work with a piece of metal, like aluminum or fiberglass or mahogany or whatever, and they would do it 100 times till they got it right. So I'd asked the artist about this piece here, and she said, well, what I did was I just had different layers. I just had cutouts. And I just kind of experimented with things just to see what I liked. And when she thought, oh, this is kind of interesting with the playful state, eventually she said, I'm going to paint it. So that was how the inspiration behind it.
It also blew my mind because I know Barbara very well, but I was not familiar with her work. We met through her late husband's work. And so I had no clue who did this. And then I ran into her at the opening and I was, oh my God, that's Barbara's work, wow! So, pretty amazing.
That's two. You're not off the hook yet.
Okay, and I don't know why, but I love the blimp, the dirigible, or the bomb, or whatever the hell it is. And it, again, for reasons unbeknown to myself, it really does it for me. And conceptually, and it makes total sense. And as an anti-war guy, that's... So normally I detest anything that flies, anything that looks like a weapon, and yet it's been transformed into an object of peace.
Good.
Thank you.
Your turn, Tom.
Well, I've picked three artists, 2 pieces each. That may be cheating a little bit, but is it Ken Berman? Yeah. I loved both of his pieces. This piece and the Lescaut piece over there as well. I love those pieces. And I don't know that I can tell you exactly why. I feel like I don't know abstract art as well as I know realist art. But there's something about that piece that works on so many different levels, it seems to me, because it has realist elements, it has abstract elements. I think the color balance is just fabulous. And I think that's an example, both of his pieces. Is he here tonight?
No.
I think both of his pieces are examples of what I was talking about of art that will continue to unfold. I think you could look at this one and that Lescaut as well, and those are paintings that are going to sort of continue to give themselves up, that will have different resonance in artificial light versus daylight, your own moods. I really, really love both of those pieces. I think they're very strong. And I'm delighted to see it's got a first prize on it as well.
That's thanks to Pat Martin.
I knew she had good taste. Huh? And I love, Janet, I love your pieces. Where are you? There you are. I love both of these pieces. I liked them in the images that we were considering because I thought they were incredibly well crafted. It can't be easy to draw out of wire. It's not easy to draw with a pencil, much less out of a wire. So I really liked both of these very much. And then I walked in tonight and saw them lit and loved them twice as much. Yeah, I think both of those pieces are just terrific. And the third artist is in the other room, those wooden kimonos. I love those. And it shows you how much power the jurors have. That was my overall #1 choice. You see the prize on that one, don't you?